Imagine wet cement. When it is fresh, it can take any shape. You can mold it, smooth it, or imprint it with the slightest touch. But once it sets, it becomes rock hard. If you try to change its shape after that, it doesn't mold, it breaks. This is exactly what happens to the human mind, but not for the reason you think. We are told that our brains harden because of age, that after 25 or 30, the biological window for rapid learning slams shut. That is a lie. The brain doesn't stop learning because it gets old. It stops learning because it gets efficient. It stops learning because it starts believing it already knows enough to survive. There is a specific, dangerous comfort in being an adult who knows how the world works. You know how to do your job. You know how to pay your bills. You know what you like to eat and who you like to spend time with. But this comfort comes at a terrifying price. The moment you believe you have mastered your environment, your brain stops recording new data. You stop seeing what is actually there and start seeing only what you expect to see. The Japanese call this the expert's mind, and it is the primary reason why intelligent, capable people stagnate for decades, watching weeks bleed into years without a single meaningful change in their lives. But there is an antidote. It is a concept that Zen masters identified 800 years ago, long before modern neuroscience confirmed their intuition. It is called Shoshin, and if you understand it, truly understand it, it does not just help you learn a new skill, it dismantles the invisible cage that has been slowly building around your potential since the day you left school. To understand how this works, we have to look at the life of a man named Alexander, because his story is likely uncomfortably close to your own. Alexander was 32 years old, and on paper, he was fine. He was a mechanic who had spent 10 years working in a busy garage. He was the kind of man
arrived before the shutters went up at 7 in the morning and left after the sun went down, his hands permanently stained with grease that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. He was honest, he was hardworking, he was tired. There is a specific type of exhaustion that comes not from physical labor, but from the realization that you are running on a treadmill. Alexander would watch customers drive into the shop in luxury sedans, men his own age wearing tailored suits, talking about business deals on their phones while he changed their oil. He wasn't jealous of their money, exactly. He was jealous of their momentum. They seemed to be going somewhere. He felt anchored to the concrete floor of the garage. He had dreams, of course. Most people do. He wanted to understand the engineering behind the engines, not just how to swap out broken parts. He wanted to start his own fabrication shop. He wanted to be physically strong, not just worn down by labor, but athletic and capable. But every time he allowed himself to think about starting an engineering degree or a business, a logical, protective voice in his head shut him down. It whispered that he was 32, that he barely finished high school, that his brain wasn't built for calculus or business strategy, that the time for becoming something new had passed. This is the first trap. We often mistake our lack of practice for a lack of talent. We tell ourselves we are not math people or not creative people, when in reality, we are just people who stopped being beginners because being a beginner feels vulnerable. Alexander believed his own excuses because they felt safe. They saved him from the risk of trying and failing, so he lived on autopilot. Home, work, sleep, repeat. Survival mode. Until a Saturday afternoon that shattered his safety. It was a mundane day. Alexander was on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, too drained to even focus on the screen. His wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen. The sound
Her moving dishes was just background noise until he heard the wet slap of a slip, followed by a silence that lasted 1 second too long, and then a scream that made his blood run cold. He didn't run to the kitchen, he scrambled. Sarah was on the floor, her face pale, clutching her arm. She had slipped on a wet patch of tile and gone down hard. The angle of her arm was wrong. The pain was clearly blinding. In that moment, the adrenaline should have given Alexander super strength. He knelt down to scoop her up, to carry her to the car, and rushed to the emergency room. He put his arms under her and heaved. And he failed. His lower back seized. His arms, tired from 10 years of repetitive, grinding labor but zero athletic training, trembled and gave out. He couldn't lift his own wife. He had to help her crawl to a chair, then support her walking to the car, every step causing her agony. The drive to the hospital was a blur of shame and panic, but as he gripped the steering wheel, another demon surfaced: the mental calculation. Emergency room copay, x-rays, specialists, prescription painkillers, physical therapy. They lived paycheck to paycheck. He knew, with sickening clarity, that this accident wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a financial disaster. They didn't have the savings. Hours later, after the cast was set and Sarah was finally sleeping on the sofa, heavily medicated, Alexander sat alone in his kitchen, in the dark. The silence of the house felt heavy. He looked at his hands. He was a man who worked 60 hours a week, yet he couldn't physically carry the person he loved most, and he couldn't pay to heal her without going into debt. He wasn't providing. He was barely surviving. That night, something inside him broke. Not his spirit, but his ego. The voice that said, "You are fine, this is just how life is," finally went silent, replaced by a cold, hard truth. The trajectory he was on led nowhere. He had to change, but deciding to change and knowing how.
Change are two very different things. This brings us to the second trap, one that traps millions of people in the modern age: the information illusion. On Monday morning, fueled by desperation, Alexander did what we all do. He turned to the internet. He searched for how to make money fast, career change at 30, and passive income ideas. The algorithms, sensing his desperation, fed him a steady diet of hope. He saw videos of 20-year-olds in rented Lamborghinis promising $10,000 a month with zero experience. He saw productivity gurus waking up at 4 a.m. to take ice baths. Alexander attacked this new world with the same brute force he used on rusted bolts at the shop. He bought a course on stock trading. He watched the videos at double speed, trying to absorb the information faster. He tried to apply the strategies, but he didn't understand the underlying market principles, so he lost the little money he experimented with. He switched tactics. He bought a course on dropshipping. He built a store, uploaded products, and waited. Nothing happened. He didn't understand marketing, or psychology, or branding. He just copied the steps he saw in the video. He was mimicking success without understanding the mechanics of it. For months, this cycle continued. Buy a course, try for 3 weeks, fail, blame himself, move to the next opportunity. He was consuming terabytes of information, but he wasn't learning anything. He was just becoming a more informed failure. The shame began to curdle into despair. The voice in his head returned, louder this time. "See? I told you. You aren't smart enough. You are a mechanic. Stay in your lane." He was ready to quit. He was ready to accept that his life would never be more than it was. One evening, Sarah, her arm still in a sling, watched him staring blankly at a spreadsheet he didn't understand. She sat down across from him. "Alex," she said softly, "you are trying to build the roof before you have poured the
foundation. You want the result, you want the money and the strength, but you are trying to skip the part where you actually become the person who can do those things." "I am learning," he snapped, defensive. "I'm studying every night." "No," she said. "You are memorizing. That isn't the same thing." Her words stung because they were true. Later that night, too frustrated to sleep, he let a random video autoplay on his phone. It wasn't a finance guru yelling at him. It was a calm voice, speaking over simple images of Japanese calligraphy. The title was obscure: Shoshin, Why You Stopped Learning. Alexander didn't want to watch it. He wanted a tactic. He wanted a solution, but he was too tired to click away. The narrator told a story about a Zen master named Shunryu Suzuki. The master said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." Alexander paused the video. He rewound it. "In the expert's mind there are few." The narrator explained that the biggest obstacle to growth isn't ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. When you think you know how the world works, that you are bad at math, or too old to exercise, or destined to be poor, you stop seeing the evidence to the contrary. You filter out opportunities because they don't fit your story. You become an expert in your own limitations. Shoshin, the narrator explained, is the practice of deliberate ignorance. It is the choice to enter every situation, even familiar ones, with the openness of a child. It is the release of the need to look smart. It is the understanding that the moment you think you have figured it out, you have died intellectually. Alexander looked around his small, dark living room. He realized he had approached every single one of his failed business attempts as an expert. He had gone in thinking, I need to make money fast, expecting the world to bend to his timeline. He judged the courses, he judged the teachers, and he judged himself.
Before he even started, he had never once allowed himself to be a fool. He had never allowed himself to start at zero. The video didn't stop at Shoshin. It introduced a roadmap, a cycle called Shu-Ha-Ri. Shu, the phase of obeying. You follow the rules of the master exactly. You do not innovate. You do not critique. You simply absorb the form until it is in your bones. Ha, the phase of detaching. Once the form is mastered, you begin to break the rules. You experiment. You find the exceptions. Ri, the phase of separating. You transcend the rules. You no longer think about the technique. You become the technique. Alexander realized he had been trying to jump straight to Ri, to the mastery, the money, the success, without ever submitting himself to Shu, the humble, boring, repetitive work of the beginner. He wanted to be an engineer without learning basic math. He wanted to be a business owner without learning sales. The video ended with a quiet challenge. What could you become if you stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be true? Alexander closed his laptop. The next day, he made a decision that looked, from the outside, like he was giving up. He stopped the trading. He closed the drop shipping store. He canceled the subscriptions to the get-rich-quick newsletters. He found a mentor, not a guru, but a retired engineer he knew from the neighborhood who also ran a small business. He asked for help. The mentor didn't offer him a job or a secret stock tip. He offered him a question. Why? The mentor asked. Why do you want to change? I want to be rich, Alexander said. I want to be secure. Those are outcomes, the mentor corrected. They are not fuel. When it gets hard, and it will get hard, the desire for money will not keep you warm. You need ikigai. Ikigai is often translated as a reason for being, but a better translation is the reason you get out of bed in the morning. It is the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the
world needs, and what you can be paid for. But for Alexander, in that moment, it was simpler. He looked at his mentor and told the truth for the first time. I don't want to be the man who couldn't lift his wife off the floor. I want to be capable. I want to look at my life and respect the man living it. Good, the mentor said. Now we begin. But we do not begin with a giant leap. We begin with Kaizen. You have likely heard of Kaizen. It is the philosophy of continuous improvement, but most people misunderstand it. They think it means try harder every day. It doesn't. Kaizen means improving by 1%, just 1%. It is an amount so small it is almost invisible, and that is why it is terrifyingly effective. If you improve by 1% every day, you don't end the year 365% better. Because of the compound effect, you end the year 37 times better. But there is a catch. For the first 30 days, or 60 days, or even 90 days, a 1% improvement looks like nothing. You work, and the mirror looks the same. You study, and the bank account looks the same. This is the valley of disappointment. This is where 99% of people quit. They don't see the result, so they assume the process is broken. But Alexander, armed with the concept of Shoshin, the beginner's mind, made a pact with himself. He would not look for results. He would not check the score. He would only focus on the dough, the path itself. He chose 3 areas: body, mind, money, and he applied the Shu stage, strict obedience, to all 3. For his body, he didn't try to become a bodybuilder overnight.
He went to a gym and asked a trainer for the most basic, boring beginner program. He lifted empty bars. He felt ridiculous. He was a grown man, a mechanic with strong forearms, struggling with form drills meant for teenagers. His ego screamed at him to add weight, to look strong in front of the other men, but he silenced it. Beginner's mind, he told himself. I know nothing. I am.
Learning the form. For his mind, he didn't enroll in a master's program. He went onto a free education site and started a high school physics course. He sat at his kitchen table at 5 a.m. before his shift at the garage, struggling with basic vectors and velocity equations. It was humbling. He felt slow, but he did the work. 1 hour every morning. No excuses. For his money, he stopped trying to make thousands. He started trying to save pennies. He bought a basic budgeting book and followed it like a religious text. He tracked every coffee, every bolt, every grocery run. He didn't interpret the advice, he just obeyed it. The first month was hell. He was tired. He was waking up earlier than ever. His muscles ached in new ways. And the worst part? Nothing happened. His savings account was still empty. His body looked exactly the same in the mirror. His wife asked him if he was okay because he looked exhausted. This is the point where the old Alexander would have quit. This is the point where he would have said, "This isn't working," and gone back to looking for a lottery ticket. But the concept of Shoshin had planted a seed. He wasn't doing this for the reward. He was doing it to become the kind of person who could do it. He was trusting the do. Then, around week 8, the invisible began to become visible. He was at the garage, lifting a heavy transmission block. Usually, he would heave it with his back, groaning. Today, he braced his core, engaged his legs, techniques he had learned in the gym, and the metal block floated up. It felt light. He paused, holding the weight, realizing that the 1% improvements had quietly stacked up until he was physically different. A few days later, he was staring at an engine schematic. Usually, it was just lines and parts, but suddenly, he saw the physics. He saw the thermodynamics he had been studying at 5 a.m. He didn't just see what the part did, he understood why the engineer had designed it that way. The world was gaining depth. And at the end of the 3rd month, he sat down with Sarah to look at their finances. There was no windfall, no miracle check. But for the first time in 10 years, there was a surplus. $70. It was a tiny amount, but it was positive. The bleeding had stopped. Alexander looked at that $70 and felt a surge of emotion stronger than if he had won $1 million. Because luck is fleeting. But this was control. This was the result of Shu, of humble, repetitive, ego-less submission to the process. He had entered the cycle. But he had no idea that this was just the preparation, the real transformation, the moment where he would move from Shu to Ha, from follower to creator, was about to happen, and it would start with a simple, stupid question he asked at work. One afternoon, staring at a classic car that had come in for a tune-up, Alexander noticed a flaw in the intake manifold design. It was a factory standard, but it was inefficient. In the past, he would have just polished it and put it back. But his new eyes, trained by physics and unclouded by the expert's assumption that this is just how it is, saw an opening. He turned to his boss. "Why don't we fabricate a custom mount for this? It would increase the airflow by 20%. His boss laughed. "We fix cars, Alex. We don't redesign them. Don't waste time." It was a rejection, but for Alexander, it was a spark. His boss was an expert. His boss saw the garage as it was. Alexander, with his beginner's mind, saw the garage as it could be. He went home that night, not to sleep, but to sketch. He had an idea. It was risky. It would require money he didn't really have and skills he was only just learning. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of looking stupid. He was only afraid of stopping. This is where the path diverges. Most of us get to the point of competence and stop. We get good enough. But Shoshin demands that even as you become an expert, you remain
a beginner. And Alexander was about to test that philosophy to its breaking point. He sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he used to stare at unpaid bills. But this time, The table was covered in blueprints. Alexander didn't have the money to buy a factory. He didn't even have the money to buy a high-end CNC machine. But he had Shoshin. He didn't pretend to be a manufacturing mogul. He was a beginner. He went onto online forums, places where seasoned engineers and machinists gathered. He posted his design. He asked questions that were, frankly, embarrassing for a man with 10 years of experience. What tolerance do I need for this alloy? Who will mill a batch of 5 units without charging a fortune? The internet can be a cruel place, but it can also be generous to those who lack ego. Because he approached them with humility, admitting what he didn't know, the experts helped him. They corrected his specs. They pointed him toward a local metal shop that took small orders. Alexander took a risk. He took the small emergency fund he had painstakingly saved over 3 months, the money that made him feel safe, and he bet it on a batch of 5 custom engine mounts. When the box arrived, he held the cold steel in his hands. It wasn't just a car part. It was the physical manifestation of his new mind. He listed them on a niche enthusiast forum. He didn't sleep for 2 days. He refreshed the page every hour. The voice in his head started whispering again. Who are you to sell this? You are a mechanic, not an engineer. Then a notification. Sold. Then another. Sold. Within 48 hours, all 5 were gone. The profit wasn't huge, maybe $200 after costs, but the validation was priceless. This is the moment Alexander entered the Ha stage. He was no longer just following the rules of his trade. He was beginning to branch out, to experiment, to adapt the principles he knew into something unique to him. For the next year, Alexander lived a double life.
By day, he was the quiet mechanic, changing oil and swapping brake pads, dutifully performing Shu. By night and early morning, he was an entrepreneur and student, living in Ha. He reinvested every penny of profit. He made 10 parts, then 20. He expanded his catalog. He was tired, yes, but it was a different kind of tired. It wasn't the draining exhaustion of hopelessness. It was the heavy, satisfying fatigue of building a cathedral stone by stone. Then came the day that terrified him more than the accident. The day the math on his side business equaled the math on his paycheck. He walked into the garage on a Tuesday morning. The smell of grease and gasoline, once the smell of his prison, now just smelled like nostalgia. He handed in his resignation. His boss looked at him like he had lost his mind. "You have a family, Alex. You have benefits. You're going to throw this away to sell parts on the internet? You'll be back in 6 months." His co-workers shook their heads. They saw a man making a reckless mistake. They didn't see the year of 5 a.m. physics lessons. They didn't see the spreadsheets. They didn't see the Kaizen. They judged his harvest because they hadn't seen him planting the seeds. Alexander drove home that day with no job, no guaranteed income, and a stomach full of butterflies. But he wasn't panicking because he knew something they didn't. He knew that security doesn't come from a paycheck. It comes from competence. It comes from the ability to learn whatever the problem requires you to learn. Fast forward 2 years. The scene is a warehouse, small but bright. The sign on the door bears Alexander's last name. Inside, 3 CNC machines are humming, a sound like money being printed. Alexander is walking the floor, but he isn't wearing a suit. He is wearing work boots and a shop apron. One of his employees, a 23-year-old kid named Marcus, watches Alexander inspect a part. Marcus is new, eager, and a bit overwhelmed. He sees Alexander strong,
Successful, knowledgeable, and he feels small. "Boss," Marcus asked during lunch, "how do you know all this? The engineering, the business side, the machining? Did you go to school for this?" Alexander laughs. It's a deep, genuine laugh. "Marcus," he says, 2 years ago, I couldn't calculate the volume of a cylinder. I was broke, and I was convinced my life was over." Marcus looks at him, confused. "So what changed?" "I stopped trying to be smart," Alexander says. "I decided to be a beginner forever." This brings us to the final stage, transcendence. Alexander had reached a point where the discipline wasn't discipline anymore. He didn't have to force himself to wake up early, his body just did it. He didn't have to force himself to study new engine trends, his curiosity pulled him there naturally. The rules he had struggled to follow in the Shu stage had been absorbed so completely that they were now his nature. He wasn't doing the work, he was the work. But here's the part that most people miss, and it is the reason why success stories often turn into tragedies. When people reach Ri, when they become masters, they usually stop. They think, I have made it. They build a statue of themselves and admire it. And that is the moment the cement hardens again. That is the moment they begin to die. Alexander, however, had learned the deepest lesson of Shoshin. Ri is not the end. It is just a new beginning. Even owning the company, Alexander still swept the floors on Fridays. He still asked his youngest employees for their opinions on new software. He still took courses on subjects he knew nothing about, just to remind himself of the feeling of being incompetent. He knew that the moment he started protecting his ego, the moment he started believing he was the expert, his growth would stop. The science backs this up, and it is ruthless. Dr. Carol Dweck, a Stanford psychologist, spent decades studying this. She found that people fall into two categories: fixed mindset
and growth mindset. The fixed mindset says, I am smart, or I am talented. This sounds positive, but it is a trap. If you believe your talent is a fixed trait, then every mistake is a crisis. Every failure proves you aren't actually smart. So you stop taking risks. You stop learning to protect your image. The growth mindset, which is the Western twin of Shoshin, says, I am a learner. When you are a learner, failure isn't a verdict, it's just data. It is information on what not to do next time. Neuroscience supports this even further. Dr. Andrew Huberman and other researchers have shown that adult neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, requires a specific chemical cocktail. You need focus, acetylcholine, and you need a sense of urgency or error, norepinephrine. In plain English, you learn best when you are struggling. You learn best when you feel a little bit stupid, a little bit agitated, and very focused. The comfort of the expert mind shuts off these chemicals. The discomfort of the beginner's mind floods the brain with them. Alexander didn't just change his habits, he chemically altered his brain by refusing to be comfortable. Now, look at the contrast. Remember the night of the accident? Alexander sitting in the dark, unable to lift his wife, terrified of a $1,000 bill? 2 years later, Sarah slipped again. It was winter and there was ice on the driveway. She went down. Alexander was there in a second. He didn't panic. He squatted down, his back straight, his legs powerful from years of consistent, boring training. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. He carried her into the house, laughing, making her feel safe. He checked her ankle. It was just a sprain. But if they had needed to go to the hospital, if the bill had been $5,000, he wouldn't have blinked. The money was there. But more importantly, the agency was there. He was no longer a victim of circumstance. He was the author of his response. This transformation wasn't magic. It wasn't a quantum leap. It was the result of 1,000 boring days of saying, I don't know, but I will learn. So, where does this leave you? You are watching this video for a reason. Maybe you feel like Alexander did at the start. Maybe you are 30 or 40 or 50, and you feel the wet cement of your mind starting to set. You feel the walls closing in. You tell yourself, it's too late to learn to code. It's too late to get in shape. It's too late to learn a language. That is the expert's mind talking. It is the voice of your ego trying to protect you from the shame of being a beginner. But here is the paradox of mastery. To become a master, you must be willing to look like a fool. You must be willing to ask the question that makes everyone look at you. You must be willing to stand at the bottom of the mountain, looking up at the peak, and accept that the only way up is one step at a time. There is a Japanese proverb, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But the teacher isn't always a person. Sometimes the teacher is a wet floor. Sometimes the teacher is a bank overdraft. Sometimes the teacher is the quiet realization that you are wasting your potential. The philosophy of Shoshin invites you to die, to let the version of you that knows everything die, so that the version of you that can learn anything can be born. You have the map. Ikigai, find the reason that fuels you. Shoshin, empty your cup. Drop the ego. Be a beginner. Shu-Ha-Ri. Obey the rules, break the rules, transcend the rules. Kaizen. Improve by 1% today. Just 1%. The world is changing faster than ever. The skills you have today will be obsolete in 5 years. If you cling to what you know, you will become a relic. But if you embrace Shoshin, if you fall in love with the process of not knowing, you become infinite. You become a machine that can adapt to any future, survive any crisis, and learn any skill. Alexander is
Special. He is just awake. Are you? If this story resonated with you, if you felt that crack in the hard cement of your mind, do not let it close up. Take one action today. Not a big one, a small one. Buy the book. Do the first workout. Write the first page. Be bad at it. Be embarrassing. Be a beginner. I want to know, what is the one thing you have stopped yourself from learning because you were afraid of looking stupid? Write it in the comments. Let's make the comments section a graveyard for our egos and a garden for our potential. Thank you for giving me your time. Now, go learn.